viewers. So today we are going to talk about the documentary RiverBlue. So before we move into the main topic and discuss the objectives of the study, one thing I would like to say that before you go through the lecture and also the study materials provided with it, it will be very helpful for your better understanding that you should watch the documentary once before you learn about it. Because once you watch the documentary, then you have a clear idea what it is about, and then the whole explanations will fall into place automatically. So let's start off with the objectives of the study. So firstly, understanding the basic concept line of the documentary, going through the basic critical overview of the documentary. Thirdly, understanding the environmental justice focused in the documentary. And lastly, studying in details certain important sequences that have been shown in the documentary. So first, let's go through the background of the film. So in the 1960s to 1990s, El Paso, Texas was the blue jeans capital of the world. It was producing 2 million pairs of jeans each week. But as the Rio Grande dried up, and the North American Free Trade Agreement, or the NAFTA, allowed the brands to hire cheaper laborers around the world, and the manufacturers now, including the Adidas, Gap, Nike, Old Navy, could open factories in Mexico. Many of them later opened factories in Bangladesh, China, and Indonesia, where low wages and environmental regulations were also weak. So as the price of the jeans fell and the production ramped up, the use of chemicals increased. For example, we all know about the acid wash jeans, which is a fashion of nowadays we can call. Those jeans are produced by spraying potassium permanganate and acid onto the fabric at very high temperatures. So these methods are very detrimental for the health of the workers and for the environment. In Xintang, Guangzhou province, the new blue jeans capital of the world, the factories produce around 300 million pairs of jeans each year. Producing just one pair of jeans uses up around 920 gallons of water. So now it is very much imaginable that how much water is probably getting polluted because of the production of these fashion statements. So much of this water is laden with heavy metal contaminants such as cadmium and also the color, and is dumped into the Pearl River with little or almost no treatment. As we discussed, that there are the environmental regulations in these countries where the labor is cheap and easily available, the environmental regulations are not followed, and therefore it gives a lot of advantage to the factory owners, but it is highly detrimental for the environment. The pollution is so evident that the it color of the coming season can be predicted by looking at the color of the river. So now we will learn a little more about the documentary RiverBlue. Released in the year 2017, it is a documentary by the Conservationist Mark Angelo. He explores the pollution of major international rivers caused by the clothing industry, irresponsible disposal of toxic chemical wastes in the river. The documentary explores the fashion sector from the denim to leather to fast fashion, and one of the world's most polluting industries. The impact on Bangladesh's Buriganga River, the China's Pearl River, and the Ganges River of India, and also the Citarum River of Indonesia, and the people who depend on this river are very, very severe. Toxic dyes and heavy metals from the textile manufacturing industry and also the leather tanning industries are easily and very frequently dumped into these rivers. And in these countries where regulations are lax or poorly enforced or both, it becomes much easier for the owner of these industries. The impact on Bangladesh's Buriganga, China's Pearl River, India's Ganges, and Indonesia's Citarum, and the people who depend on these rivers are very severe. Toxic dyes and heavy metals from these textile manufacturing industries and also the leather tanning industries are frequently dumped into these rivers in these countries where the regulations are lax, poorly enforced, or even both. The textile and tannery sectors alone account for the 20% of the world's freshwater pollution, says Angelo. But they don't get anywhere near the level of scrutiny that the other big polluters receive. The film interviews local activists, investigators, and manufacturers as it sheds light on the crisis affecting some of the world's most significant waterways. Although it focuses on the pollution production by the blue jeans manufacturing and the tannery sectors, the film also explores the latest technologies and also the cutting edge alternatives that can provide solution to this huge problem and reduce the water consumption and dumping of the wastes by these industries. So now we will understand the basic concept line of the film. So RiverBlue is a documentary film and connects the consumer appetite for fast fashion with a rapid increase in the highly profitable but environmentally damaging production of disposable clothing. The host, Mark Angelo, documents the profound impact of the textile industries serving the fashion industry in the Western countries on the rivers in Bangladesh, China, India, and Indonesia. The factories' output of polluted water kills aquatic life, contaminates the crops, and eventually reaches the open ocean. And this contamination has no basic end. It also reaches humans through these rivers, crops, and even when the river wildlife is consumed by the human beings. Angelo also explores the alternative and responsible manufacturing processes that can help resolve this global issue. The Thames and the Zambezi rivers provide encouraging examples for the world of restored and pristine waterways, respectively. RiverBlue documents the profound impact of textile industries serving the fashion industry in the countries of Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, UK, USA, and Zambia. The film connects the consumer appetite for cheap and trendy garments with a rapid increase in the profitable but unsustainable production of the disposable clothing. The film visits communities that rely on their waterways for food, livestock, and sustenance, and it chronicles the devastating effects of the untreated wastewater from these factories. Overall, the film educates the viewer on the issues of environmental degradation, global trade agreements, workers' rights, and hazardous working conditions. As a teaching tool, the film is more than a critique of the fashion industry. It also explores alternatives and responsible manufacturing processes that can resolve the global problems. So, the question is, why do we need films that represent social issues? In order to answer this question, an understanding of film sociology, which studies the relationship between the film and the society, is firstly needed. Cinema is universally considered to be one of the most effective cultural messengers due to the way that it captures scenes and make them come to life and give them back to people. In line with Crosser's film theory that states that the film provides an open window to society, film can also be seen as a social product and is able to convey wishes and emotions of the public. We might ask how films can take a neutral and universal stance on problems such as environmental pollution or the still widespread inequality amongst genders. From a sociological point of view, films have performed various functions according to the times in which they were produced. In early days of the film, the medium attracted its audience as a novel form of entertainment. Before and after war, for example in South Korea and Germany, films served the respective regimes' political ends by shaping public opinion and informing the processes of warfare. They also acted as a means of analyzing audiences' interests. The environmental justice addressed in the documentary RiverBlue. Supported by international trade agreements, fashion companies have outsourced manufacturing and jobs to China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, and other countries where the environmental regulations and the laws protecting the workers and the environment are lacking. RiverBlue draws attention to the toxic living and working conditions experienced by the workers and their families that are impacted by the toxic waste on their health and the environment. Many workers must perform their jobs in a dangerous and unsanitary condition with continuous exposure to toxins and reflecting the disproportionate exposure of poorer populations to the environmental risks in their homes and workplaces. The fashion brands benefit from these profitable industries often escape the responsibility for the damage to the environment and to the workers' health. RiverBlue argues that alternatives to current practices do exist and they could be more widely adopted. Consumer activism, the film suggests, could pressure companies to adopt more sustainable and less polluting practices. It's time for a small quiz. So, the documentary RiverBlue was made by whom? Your options are option A, James Cameron, option B, Anton Chekhov, option C, Mark Angelo, and option D, Christopher Nolan. And yes, you're right. The correct option is option C, Mark Angelo. In this film, on the bank of Bangladesh's Buriganga river, the journalist Pinaki Roy describes how the untreated effluents from the garment and dyeing industries are causing the aquatic life to perish, and the stark images of the community members suffering from liver and skin diseases are presented. In India, though the faith decrees of the sanctity of the Ganges river, wastewater polluted with toxic chromium from tanneries mixes with the irrigation water to later affect the food production as well. Sunita Narayan refers to this toxic pollution and destruction of the ecology of the river as hydrocide. Indonesia's Citarum river is so polluted by the chemical dumping of factory waste, the water bubbles with the gases given by the pollutants which have already sunk in the river. What could be the solution of this global problem that exacerbates environmental issues through the fast fashion supply chain? One approach could be the detox. Developed by Greenpeace and adapted by some fashion brands, the detox campaign reduces the use of toxic chemicals and carcinogens that affect humans. Another initiative developed by Genealogia uses air instead of water to create stone-washed denim. Lasers can also be used to create distressed jeans without use of chemicals. Ital Denim, a company based in Italy, uses chitosan, a natural material made from discarded shellfish instead of chemicals to help set the blue dyes. Lessons can also be learned from England's Thames River, which was severely polluted because of the toxic effluents from industries. Following the massive conservation efforts and strict legislation, some aquatic health has been restored. At the consumer end, education and awareness is also very, very important, and it needs to be increased. Consumers can vote with their dollars and choose to purchase ethically and sustainably produced denim. In the words of Ursula de Castro, a sustainable fashion designer, the textile industry needs to be committed to consumers by paying attention to transparency and traceability, removing toxicity and reducing textile waste. Now, we will learn about the certain locations on which this movie was shot. So, the Li River, Xingtang, China was one of them, Pearl River, China, Ganges River, Varanasi and Kanpur in India, the Buriganga River in Dhaka, Bangladesh, the Hazaribagh, Bangladesh, Zambezi River in Zambia, Citarum River in Jakarta, Indonesia, Los Angeles River and the Griffith Park, Los Angeles, California, the Thames River in London, England. There are a lot of activists, socialists, and even designers and conservationists who have been featured in this documentary. First is obviously Mark Angelo, who is a river conservationist and founder of the World Rivers Day. Tianjia Ma, the toxics campaigner, Greenpeace China. Kumi Naidu, the international executive director, Greenpeace. Pinaki Roy, the reporter, the Daily Star, Dhaka and Hazaribagh, Bangladesh. Ursula de Castro, sustainable fashion designer in UK. Francois Girbaud, the denim designer and creator of stone-washed denim, France. And a lot of water consultants and environmentalists have been a part of this coveted documentary. Now, we will go through some important sequences from the documentary. Of course, firstly, the introduction and the head credits are by Mark Angelo, who introduces the blue earth as it appears from outer space. Ocean makes up 97% of the world's water. Another 2% is locked up in ice, which leaves about 1% that can be found in the lakes and rivers. Water is a very finite source, and with the little that we have available, we need to be very respectful about it and how we use it to meet human as well as agricultural and industrial needs. Rivers also serve as arteries and lifelines. In a sequence that talks about the cost development in China, a woman carries agricultural material in rural China. The World Watch Institute reports that about 70% of China's lakes and rivers are now contaminated. China has transformed from a country reliant on agriculture into the world's factory. Cities are growing at an incredible rate, and the industries are rapidly growing alongside them, often without any effective regulation of the use of the water. Toxic dumping has resulted in rivers turning red and murky. Ma Jun describes the loss of biodiversity and the health hazards facing the millions of people exposed to the water pollution. In another sequence, it shows the response to the environmental problems in China. Tianjia Ma investigates at grassroots levels the impact of exposure of the toxins on human health. A major source of pollution comes from the factories producing for the Western clothing industry including the Adidas, Nike, and Puma, etc. The carcinogenic dyes and other chemicals used in the textile industry are the primary sources of pollution. These chemicals finally end up in the ocean that may travel around the world. While manufacturing offers economic benefits, China has suffered severe environmental damage due to its major rivers. Investigation of these issues in the country can be very difficult. The consequences in Bangladesh. By journalist Pinaki Roy is passionate about the Buriganga River, which receives toxic chemicals from the local garment and tannery industries, but no treatment plants are installed. It makes the water ink black. Sadly, the river contains more chemical than water. In another scene in and around Hazaribagh, 180,000 people are exposed to these chemicals. Many of them have lost their sense of smell, while others suffer from cancer, skin diseases, and even liver diseases. After all, low-cost clothing comes at a very high cost. Fashion becomes a global industry. A close-up on jeans. El Paso, Texas, was once the denim capital of the world, as we discussed. Facilitated by NAFTA, the migration of jobs began with factories moving from US to Mexico in search of cheap labor and lower overall costs. Many of the supply chains are now much longer, stretching into China and Southeast Asia, where environmental laws are lax. Xintang now turns out 300 million pair of jeans each year. Water consumption is high, as Majun says, and so is the environmental cost. Another very important sequence in the documentary talks about the leaders in the sustainable fashion, and they are also interviewed. Recognizing the need for change, Ursula de Castro and Nicole Bridger design sustainable products. We are destroying the planet for the sake of clothing, says de Castro. Eric Dickstein of Dutel Denim produces ethical jeans. Francois Girbot, the inventor of acid-wash denim, didn't anticipate the heavy pollution and toxic working conditions that followed. We are dying for the jeans, he says. This is suicide for the planet, other designers weigh in. The next sequence, which is very important in the context of the MOOC documentary, is the consumer responsibility. The responsible buying of clothing and getting educated on what is happening in the local communities and rivers is extremely important for the consumers. Stop hoarding. Use buying power to influence the brands and pressurizing them to green their supply chain. Pushing of big companies to move to greener methods and more sustainable methods for the environment is extremely important for all the consumers to understand. They must allow the manufacturing processes to become traceable and transparent. And before we move on to the concluding remarks, it's time for another quiz. Who investigated at the grassroots level the impact of exposure of toxins to health? Your options are A. Tianjin Ma, B. Marjun, C. Kumi Naidu, and D. Hilda Meutia. And yes, the correct option is Tianjin Ma. So, to conclude, the film discussed here resulted in a heightened sense of responsibility in the fast fashion industry and among individual consumers with regard to poor working conditions and pollution in developing countries. The film delivers a message that encourages consumer activities for better conceptual consumption using the language of the documentary film. Thank you.